I want to ask you something before I start. Have you ever stood inside someone else's house and realized the person you were afraid of wasn't the stranger across the street? It was the person sleeping next to you. That's where this story ends. Let me tell you where it begins. My name is Claire. I'm 39 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, or I lived there. I'm still in Phoenix, but not in that house, not anymore. I don't think I could go back to that house if someone paid me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start with the neighborhood, because the neighborhood matters. You need to picture it to understand why any of this felt so impossible, so completely outside the realm of things that happen to people like me in places like that. It was one of those subdivisions in North Phoenix that all look the same from the outside. Tan stucco houses, terracotta roofs, two-car garages, little patches of desert landscaping out front. Because nobody in Phoenix has a real lawn, the water bills would bankrupt you. Wide, quiet streets, speed bumps every 100 yards. The kind of neighborhood where people wave when they drive past and actually mean it. We moved in 2015, me, my husband Joel, and our two kids, Emma, who was 4 at the time, and Marcus, who had just turned 7. Joel had just gotten a promotion at his firm. We had been renting an apartment on the east side for 3 years, and we were finally ready to buy something, to plant ourselves somewhere, to have a place that was ours. I remember the day we moved in. It was August. Phoenix in August is not a month that welcomes you warmly. It was 112 degrees and we were carrying boxes from a moving truck while the sun tried to kill us, and I thought, this is the most miserable I have ever been, and also, somehow, the happiest. That is the feeling I'm trying to hold on to now, that specific August day. Because everything that came before what I'm about to tell you, I need you to know it was real. It was good. I was happy. Our neighbor across the street was a man named Daniel Marsh. He was there when we moved in, stood at the end of his driveway and watched us for a while, then walked over and introduced himself. Mid-40s, maybe, average height, forgettable face, the kind of face that if you saw it in a crowd, you would not be able to describe it accurately afterward. Brown hair going gray, glasses, quiet voice. He seemed fine, normal. He kept his yard neat and his garage door closed, and his lights on a timer. He was the kind of neighbor you forget is there. Not unfriendly, just invisible in the particular way that solitary people in suburban neighborhoods tend to be invisible. Present enough to wave to, absent enough that you stop really seeing him. 8 years. That is how long Daniel Marsh lived across the street from us. 8 years of waves from driveways, 8 years of occasional small talk over trash cans on Tuesday mornings. A handful of times he watched our dog when we went out of town. I left him a key for that, which I cannot think about now without feeling physically ill. A few times he joined us for neighborhood gatherings, the kind of low-key street parties that happen on 4th of July, where everyone brings a dish and the kids run around until dark. He was just there, background, part of our life without ever really being part of our life. And then in March of last year, he was gone. Not dramatically. No moving truck, no goodbye, no forwarding address left with anyone on the street. Just 1 week his car was in the driveway, and the next week it wasn't. The next week after that, a lockbox appeared on his front door. The week after that, a realtor's sign went up in the yard. I noticed, obviously. You notice when an 8-year neighbor disappears without a word. But I didn't think much of it. People move. People's circumstances change. He was a quiet man who kept to himself. It made a certain sense that he would leave the same way he had always lived, without announcement. The house sat empty for about 6 weeks, and here is where I have to be honest with you about something. What I did next was Look, I know how it sounds, and I know that in retrospect it looks either very brave or very stupid depending on how you think about these things. But I want to explain the mindset I was in so you understand it wasn't completely random. Emma, my daughter, who was 12 by then, had left a jacket at the neighborhood 4th of July party 2 summers earlier. A specific jacket she loved. We had always thought it might have ended up at Daniel's by accident, since he had been helping clean up that night. We had never confirmed it either way. It had just become one of those household mysteries that you stop actively pursuing. I know, that sounds like a thin excuse. Maybe it was, but that is genuinely what I was thinking about when I found myself standing on Daniel Marsh's front porch on a Saturday afternoon in May with the lockbox on the door and the realtor's sign in the yard and the house sitting empty and quiet in the Phoenix heat. I told myself I was just going to check, just going to peek through the window, see if maybe the jacket was visible somewhere, inside. The front door was unlocked. Not the lockbox, that was locked, but the door itself, just not latched properly. It swung open about 2 inches when I touched the handle. I stood there for a moment. I pushed it open. I went inside. The house was empty, completely stripped. No furniture, no curtains, nothing on the walls. That particular echoey silence of a house that has been vacated. My footsteps were loud on the tile floor. The air smelled of dust and something faintly chemical, like cleaning products. I did a quick walkthrough, living room, kitchen, hallway. No jacket, obviously. I had known there wouldn't be a jacket. Some part of me had known that before I walked in. But I kept moving anyway, down the hallway toward the back of the house. The 2 smaller rooms were empty. The door at the end of the hallway, what would have been the master bedroom, was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room was not completely empty. There was something on the floor in the corner. A cardboard box, flaps open, that whoever had cleared the house had apparently missed or left intentionally. Just sitting there in the corner of the empty room in the flat white light coming through the bare window. I almost left it. I almost turned around and walked back out the way I came. I had already done the thing I came to do, or the thing I had told myself I came to do, and there was nothing here, and I should go home. I didn't go home. I walked to the corner and I looked in the box. Photographs. Printed photographs. The kind you get at a drugstore photo counter, stacked loosely inside the box, no order to them, like they had been thrown in quickly. I picked up the top one, and I felt something happen to my body that I still don't have a clean way to describe, a kind of dropping, like the floor moved, like gravity changed direction slightly. It was a photograph of my house, taken from across the street, from his driveway, I realized immediately, or somewhere near it, taken at night. The lights were on inside. Through the living room window you could see the outline of someone moving. I picked up the next one, my car, parked in my driveway, close enough that the license plate was clearly visible. The next one, my daughter Emma walking to the school bus stop at the end of the street, taken from a distance with what must have been a zoom lens. She was maybe 10 in the photo. Her backpack was the purple one she had in 4th grade. My hands were shaking now. I kept going through them. My son Marcus on his bike, Emma in the front yard, my car again from a different angle, the front of my house in daylight, the front of my house at night, my husband Joel getting out of his car in the driveway. Joel. There were a lot of photographs of Joel. I stopped on one of them. Joel standing at my kitchen window, taken from outside, clearly, from the street, or from Daniel's yard. Joel was on his phone. His expression was... I looked at that photograph for a long time, because Joel was smiling, the particular smile he had when he was talking to someone he was glad to hear from. And something about that,
Something about seeing that specific smile in a photograph taken by a man who had been secretly photographing my family from across the street for what looked like years. Something about that made the floor move again, in a different way this time.
I stood in that empty room for a long time. Photographs spread around me on the floor, and I kept thinking, 8 years. He was there for 8 years. And somewhere in that box, in those photographs, was an answer I wasn't sure I was ready for. Because the question, the one that was forming slowly in the back of my mind, like something coming into focus, was who told him to? I took the box home. I know that probably wasn't the right thing to do, legally speaking. I know that technically I had just walked into someone else's house and removed something from it. I know all of that. But I was not thinking clearly, and the box was in my hands, and my legs were carrying me across the street, and then I was inside my own house with the front door locked behind me and the box on my kitchen table. I stood there for a moment. My house. The same house that was in those photographs. The same kitchen window Joel was standing at when Daniel took that picture of him smiling at his phone. I looked at that window from the inside now and tried to imagine what it looked like from the street at night with the lights on, and I felt something move through me that was cold and specific and had no clean name. I sat down at the table. I went through the entire box slowly this time, methodically, the way you do when you are trying to make sense of something instead of just reacting to it. There were 67 photographs. I counted them, laid them out on the table in the order I pulled them from the box, and counted them. 67 photographs of my family taken without our knowledge over what appeared to be several years. I could tell from the ages of the kids in some of them. Emma's purple backpack placed some of them at least 2 years ago, maybe 3. Others were more recent. Marcus in his current school hoodie, my car with the new bumper sticker Emma put on it last summer. Years. He had been doing this for years. I sorted them into rough categories: photos of the house, exterior, different times of day, different seasons, photos of the kids, photos of me, fewer than I expected, maybe 8 or 10 total, and photos of Joel. 23 photographs of Joel, nearly a third of the entire box. Joel getting out of his car, Joel in the driveway on his phone, Joel at the kitchen window, Joel leaving the house in the morning, Joel coming home at night, Joel talking to Daniel himself. There were 2 photographs of that, the 2 of them standing in our driveway having what looked like a perfectly ordinary conversation. Which meant Daniel had a camera running even when he was standing right there talking to us, even when he was being our neighbor, being normal, accepting the invitation to the 4th of July, watching our dog. The whole time. I pushed back from the table. I went to the kitchen sink and ran cold water over my wrists like you do when you feel like you might pass out, and I stood there for a while, just breathing. Then I went back to the table, because there was something else in the box. Underneath the photographs, at the very bottom, I had noticed it when I was sorting, but I had left it for last. A small notebook, spiral-bound, the cheap kind you buy in a pack of 3 at a drugstore. I picked it up. I opened it. The handwriting inside was small and very neat, precise, the handwriting of someone who was careful about things. It was a log. Dates down the left side of each page, entries beside each date. Short, factual, no emotion in them at all, like a report. March 4th, Jay leaves at 7:42 a.m., returns 6:15 p.m. March 7th, Jay leaves at 7:39 a.m., does not return until 11:08 p.m. J. Joel. C. Me. He had been logging us, logging Joel specifically. The entries were almost entirely about Joel, his comings and goings, what time he left, what time he came back, who he talked to in the driveway, what he was carrying. I went through every page. The log went back farther than the photographs. The first entry was dated 4 years ago. 4 years. Daniel Marsh had been keeping a written log of my husband's movements for 4 years. I sat with that for a long time, and then I started looking at the entries more carefully because I had been reading them as something being done to us. Daniel watching Joel, Daniel logging Joel, Daniel's strange fixation on my family. But the longer I sat there, the more something started to feel off that framing. There was an entry from about 18 months ago that stopped me. November 9th. Jay meets contact at Camelback. 45 minutes. Same car as last week. Plates confirmed. Contact. Plates confirmed. That was not the language of a stalker. That was not the language of someone with an obsession. That was the language of surveillance. Professional surveillance. I put the notebook down. I picked up my phone, and then I put my phone back down because I didn't know who to call. I almost called Joel. My first instinct was always Joel, had been Joel for 14 years. And then I looked at the photograph of him smiling at his phone through our kitchen window and put my phone face down on the table. I sat there for a long time, thinking about the word contact, thinking about plates confirmed, thinking about the fact that someone had been watching my husband for 4 years and keeping detailed records of his movements, and I had lived directly across the street from that person and given him a key to my house. I had given him a key to my house. And then, slowly, the way realizations come when your brain is trying to protect you from something, another thought arrived. What if Daniel Marsh wasn't the one who decided to watch Joel? What if someone had asked him to? I picked up the notebook again, went back to the beginning, read every entry again more carefully this time, looking not at what was written, but at the shape of it, the consistency of it, the fact that it never missed a day in 4 years, the fact that it was precise and detailed and used words like contact and confirmed. This wasn't someone who had developed a neighborhood obsession. This was someone doing a job, which meant there was someone on the other end of that job, someone who wanted to know where Joel went and when, and who he met and what car they drove. Someone who had positioned Daniel Marsh directly across the street from my family for 8 years. I thought about the day Daniel had introduced himself, August 2015, us carrying boxes in 112 degrees heat, him walking over from his driveway with his forgettable face and his quiet voice. We had moved in first. Daniel had been there when we arrived. I grabbed my laptop. I pulled up the county assessor's website. In Arizona, you can look up property ownership records online. It takes about 30 seconds. I typed in Daniel's address. The house had been purchased in June 2015, 2 months before we moved in. I stared at that date. We had moved into our house in August 2015. Daniel had bought the house across the street 2 months before we arrived. He didn't move in after us. He was already there, waiting. I closed the laptop. I looked at the notebook. I looked at the photographs. And I thought about my husband, Joel. 14 years of marriage. 2 kids. A house in North Phoenix with a 2-car garage and a desert garden and a neighbor across the street who had been watching us since before we even arrived. Someone had put Daniel Marsh there. Someone had bought that house and placed that man in it and pointed him at my family 2 months before we moved in. And there was only one person in my life who had known where we were going to live before we got there. Only one person who had known the address. Only one person who could have made that call. I picked up my phone again. This time, I didn't call Joel. I called my sister. My sister's name is Rachel. She's 3 years older than me, lives in Scottsdale, about 20 minutes away. We talk 2 or 3 times a week, have since we were kids, that particular frequency of contact that becomes so normal you stop noticing it, like breathing. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "I need you to come over, right now. Don't ask me why on the phone, just come." She was there in 18 minutes. I had the photographs spread across the kitchen table when she walked in, the notebook open to the first page. I had made coffee I didn't drink. I had sat in the same chair the entire time she was driving over, not moving, just sitting with the thing I had figured out and turning it over and over in my mind, looking for another explanation. There wasn't another explanation. Rachel stood in the doorway of the kitchen and looked at the table and then looked at me. She said, "Claire, what is this?" Not a question, the kind of sentence that already knows it isn't going to like the answer. I told her everything. The unlocked door, the box in the corner, the 67 photographs, the notebook, the property records, all of it. I talked for probably 20 minutes without stopping, and Rachel sat across from me and listened without interrupting, which is not something Rachel does easily. She is not a quiet person by nature. The fact that she didn't say a word the entire time I was talking told me she understood the weight of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Have you talked to Joel?" "No," I said. "Are you going to?" I looked at the photograph of Joel at the kitchen window, smiling at his phone. I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know what I'm accusing him of. I don't even know what this is yet. Rachel leaned forward. She tapped the notebook with one finger. "This," she said, "is surveillance. Someone surveilled your family, and the person who set it up knew where you were going to live before you lived there." "I know," I said. "That's a very short list of people." "I know," I said again. We sat with that. Rachel was the one who suggested we call someone. Not the police, not yet, she said, not until we understood more about what we were actually looking at, but someone who could help us figure out what the notebook meant, what the log entries meant. Words like contact and plates confirmed. She knew someone, a friend of her husband's who had spent 20 years in law enforcement before going private. His name was Frank. She called him from my kitchen table while I sat there holding my coffee cup and staring at nothing. Frank came over that evening. He was in his late 50s, compact, unhurried, the kind of man who looks at a room before he enters it. He sat down at the kitchen table and went through the photographs one by one, without touching them. He had put on gloves when he arrived, which I hadn't thought to do and which made me feel suddenly sick about how many times I had handled everything. Then he read the notebook from beginning to end. He asked me 2 questions when he finished. First, does your husband work in a field that would make him a target for surveillance? Law, finance, government, anything like that? Joel was a project manager at a construction firm. I said that. Frank nodded slowly. And second, in the last 4 or 5 years, has anything unusual happened financially?
Unexplained money coming in, accounts you didn't recognize, anything like that? I started to say no, and then I stopped, because there was something I had filed away as, I don't know, as Joel handling things, as the kind of financial detail I left to him because he had always managed our accounts and I had always trusted that. About 3 years ago, I had noticed a savings account I didn't recognize on our banking app. Just briefly. It was there, and then the next time I looked, it wasn't. I had asked Joel about it, and he had said it was an old account he was closing, nothing to worry about, and I had believed him. I told him that. He wrote something down. He said, "Claire, I want to be very careful about how I say this. I don't know what your husband is involved in. I don't know if he is a victim of this surveillance or the subject of it, or something more complicated than either of those things. But I want you to understand, whoever set this up did it carefully. This is not amateur work. This took planning and money and time." I asked him what he meant by something more complicated. He looked at me for a moment. He said, "Is it possible your husband knew Daniel Marsh before you moved to that neighborhood?" The question landed in the room and just sat there. I thought about August 2015, moving day, Daniel walking over from his driveway, the introduction, the handshake, Joel's easy smile. Joel always had an easy smile with people. It was one of the things I had loved about him, the way he made everyone feel immediately comfortable. Had there been something in that moment, something between them that I had read as ordinary neighborly introduction, but was actually something else? I didn't know. I genuinely did not know, and that not knowing was its own specific kind of terrifying. Frank took the notebook with him. He said he wanted to run the car plates mentioned in the entries through some contacts he still had. He said give him 48 hours. After he left, Rachel wanted to stay. I told her to go home to her family. I needed to be alone with this for a while. I needed to look at my husband. Joel came home at 6:30. Normal time. He came through the garage door the way he always did, set his bag down, called out that he was home. Normal. Completely normal. The same man I had been married to for 14 years, moving through our house the way he always moved through it. I was in the kitchen. The box was hidden in my car. The photographs were in a folder in my closet. The kitchen table was clear. He came in and kissed me on the cheek and opened the refrigerator and asked what was for dinner, and I stood there and I looked at him. Really looked at him. And I thought about something Frank had said as he was leaving. He had stopped at the front door and turned back and said, "One more thing. The property records you found, June 2015, 2 months before you moved in, how did you decide on that particular house in that particular neighborhood?" I had told him Joel had found it. Joel had been the one searching listings. Joel had come home one night excited about a house he had seen, and we had gone to look at it together the next weekend, and I had loved it immediately, and we had made an offer within the week. Frank had nodded. He hadn't said anything else. He hadn't needed to. I stood in my kitchen watching my husband look through the refrigerator, and I thought about that. Joel had found the house. Joel had brought us there, and 2 months before we arrived, a man with a notebook and a camera had moved in across the street. Joel grabbed a beer and turned around and smiled at me. "You okay?" he asked. "You look tired." "I'm fine," I said. I smiled back. And I thought, 48 hours. Frank needs 48 hours. I can do 48 hours.
Frank called me 36 hours later. Not 48. 36. Which told me before he said a single word that what he had found was not something that could wait. He said, "Claire, I need you to sit down." I was already sitting. He said, The plates, in the notebook. I ran all of them. I waited. Frank? I said. The fourth plate, he said carefully, is registered to a vehicle currently listed under your husband's name. The room went very quiet. Not a car I recognize, I said slowly. No, Frank said. It wouldn't be. I sat with that information for a long time after Frank hung up. A car registered under Joel's name that I had never seen, that I didn't know existed, showing up in a surveillance log kept by a man who'd been watching my family for 4 years from across the street. A car Joel had apparently driven to meet someone. A contact. Plates confirmed. I went to our filing cabinet that night after Joel fell asleep. We kept everything in there. Insurance documents, tax returns, car titles. I had never had a reason to go through it carefully before. I had trusted Joel with the paperwork the way I trusted him with everything. I went through every folder. It took me 2 hours, and I found it. A registration document for a 2019 Honda Civic, dark gray, registered to Joel's name to an address I didn't recognize. Not our house, not his office, an apartment in Tempe that meant nothing to me. The registration had been renewed twice. The insurance was current. Joel owned a car I had never seen, registered to an address I didn't know. I took a photograph of the document with my phone. I put everything back exactly as I had found it. I went back to bed and lay in the dark next to my husband and stared at the ceiling until 4 in the morning. The next day, I called Frank. Frank moved fast after that, faster than I expected. Within a week, he had connected enough dots to give me a picture. Not complete, not every detail, but enough. The address in Tempe was an apartment. Joel had been renting it for 3 years. A woman lived there. Her name was Stephanie. She was 34 years old. She worked in marketing. She had been in a relationship with my husband for, as far as Frank could determine, most of those 3 years. I want to pause here because I think people expect that this is where I fell apart. It's not. I had been falling apart quietly for a week already. By the time Frank told me about Stephanie, I had already grieved something. Not the marriage, exactly, not yet, but the version of Joel I had believed in. That had already been dying since the moment I stood in Daniel Marsh's empty room and picked up that first photograph. What I felt when Frank said her name was not devastation. It was clarity. Because now the shape of the whole thing was visible. Daniel Marsh had not been surveilling my family. Daniel Marsh had been surveilling Joel. For Stephanie. Frank explained it carefully. He said it was not uncommon in certain situations, when someone suspects a partner of living a double life but can't prove it, when there are financial stakes involved, when someone wants documentation before making a move, to hire a private investigator to gather information. Stephanie had hired Daniel. She had wanted to know the full extent of Joel's other life, his real life, the wife and the kids and the house in North Phoenix that he had presumably told her some version of, or not told her, or half told her, or told her it was over when it wasn't. She wanted proof of what she was dealing with, and Daniel had spent 4 years getting it for her. I asked Frank, why did he leave? Why did Daniel Marsh disappear in March? Frank said he thought Stephanie had finally gotten what she needed. The documentation was complete. There was no more reason to maintain the position. I thought about that word, position. Daniel Marsh had maintained a position across the street from my family for 8 years, had moved in 2 months before we did, had introduced himself at the moving truck, had watched our kids grow up, had held our dog's leash, and the whole time he was working. I confronted Joel on a Thursday evening. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't rehearse it. I just waited for the kids to be at Rachel's, and I sat down at the kitchen table, and I put the registration document in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at me, and he didn't deny it. That was the thing I hadn't expected. I had prepared myself for denial, for argument, for the disorienting experience of someone trying to convince you that what you know is not what you know. He just deflated, like something went out of him. He said he was sorry. He said it had gotten out of hand. He said he loved me. He said a lot of things that I listened to from a very calm and distant place inside myself, the way you listen to rain when you're inside and dry. I told him I wanted him out of the house by the weekend. He left. That was 7 months ago. The divorce is in process. The kids they're getting through it. Emma cried for 2 weeks and then got angry, and the anger is honestly easier to work with than the crying was. Marcus went quiet for a while, but he's talking more now. We're all in therapy. We're all figuring out what this new shape looks like. I think about Stephanie sometimes. I have complicated feelings about her. She hired a man to surveil my family for 4 years. I cannot make that okay, no matter how I try. But she was also, in her own way, a woman who had been lied to by the same man, who had wanted the truth badly enough to spend years, and what I can only imagine was a significant amount of money, trying to get it. She got it. So did I, just not the way either of us expected. The house sold last month. New family moving in, I heard. Young couple, a baby, starting something new in those tan stucco walls with the terracotta roof and the desert garden. I hope the house across the street stays empty for a while. I hope they wave at their neighbors and mean it, and never have a single reason to think twice about it. I genuinely do. That's the whole story. Or the part I'm ready to tell. I asked you something at the beginning. Have you ever looked at your life and thought, this is safe, this is mine? I had that. And then I walked into an empty house across the street, and I found out that safe is sometimes just another word for not knowing yet. If you're carrying something like this, you already know what I mean. Thanks for listening.